need this, right? Okay. I tend to be really loud, so if I get to be too loud, somebody make a sign or something. One thing before I start, I want to make a little heads up. I have a couple of products from Lake County. This is a commercial announcement before my comments. I have a couple of products from Lake County that demonstrate what ag in the classroom has done for our society in terms of thinking about food and fiber production. And these three items I'm going to talk about really briefly, but they illustrate how agriculture is changing in response to what you have done in educating kids about sustainable food systems. So let me mention these, and I'm going to give these three items away at the end of my comments based on a quiz I'm going to give you about some of the things I'm saying. So that's maybe a tactic that will help you pay attention. But let me talk about these three items. The red wine called Cimarron that is on the far left there comes from a ranch in Lake County called Vigilance Vineyards. And what they're vigilant about is the way they farm. And they're vigilant about the way they farm because they know people are becoming more and more interested in their food system. Nowadays, there's a whole new foodie culture out there, and they're going to talk about it. So Vigilance Vineyard is not a monoculture. It's small vineyards with olive orchards and sheep operations all mixed together. They also produce some wonderful wine. The other wine is from Six Sigma Ranch and Vineyards. It's a 4,000-acre ranch, of which 100 acres is in vineyard. The rest is a dedicated conservation easement where they also run some sheep and cattle. They've planned their agricultural operation that way because they know that's what people want to see. Sustainable farms that contribute to the environment as well as to their bottom line, their profits. And the last item, this sack of walnuts here, these are certified organic Hartley walnuts. How many people have heard of Hartley variety walnuts? Not many people. Trust me, 10 years from now, you're going to buy walnuts like you buy wine. You'll buy by variety. And I'll tell you right now that Hartley is an heirloom variety. Everybody plants Chandlers nowadays. But Hartleys, and if there's walnut growers in the audience, they'll disagree with me, Hartleys are probably the best tasting walnut there are. So anyway, these are, and I'm going to give those three items away. Our ranch is certified organic. The walnuts, we have grass-fed beef, we have sustainably harvested firewood. But the main income on our ranch is people, tourists, agritourism. That's what we do. We invite families onto the ranch. We have a house that we dedicate for agritourism, and we're trying to extend ag education in an informal setting. So that's a little commercial announcement. So for the quiz, I'm going to encourage you, in your bags at the end of my comments, there's a 4-H notepad, post-it notes. And so if you write your name and the answers to the three questions I'm going to ask you at the end of the quiz, and put those in this box, then Judy or her staff sometime during the day will pull those out and give these items away. So I'm going to...
Only if they get correct answers?
Yeah, pull out the first correct answer that you get. Yeah, if you get the wrong answer, you're out of luck, so pay attention. So anyway, I want to talk quickly about my credentials so that you'll see that I am somewhat credible. I worked for 30 years for the University of California, so I'm going to talk a little bit about research because that's what the university does, is research. The most important credential I have is that I'm married to a classroom teacher. So she keeps me honest about what is possible and what's not possible in the classroom. I'm also a farmer nowadays. I retired from the university and we farm full-time now. And I'm also a San Francisco native, so I understand the urban environment as well as the rural environment. And I'm a migrant laborer. We live part-time in Placerville, and then I migrate to Lake County where we actually farm. So that's a little bit. Why why do I personally think ag in the classroom is important and ag literacy is important? On a really personal level, there's 3 reasons that I think it's important. One is, and I'd encourage you to read sometime, Wendell Berry's long poem, which is called The Farm. And I can tell you that if you read that poem, you will be touched personally, not because of an ag background, but because every human being is designed to be tied to the land. And food and agriculture is the most significant way to do that. And Wendell Berry describes that connection in his poem beautifully. Also, another reason I personally believe in ag in the classroom is because when I grew up here in San Francisco, and we would have lunch out in the schoolyard in a very diverse school setting. So we had a lot of Asian students, a lot of black students, a lot of Hispanic students. And one of the things at lunchtime out on the schoolyard, kids were fascinated with food, you know, so I would see an Asian student eating their lunch very different from the bologna or salami that I had in my sandwich. And we would go over and talk about food, and there was this energy around, natural energy around food. So I think it's a real motivator in the classroom to talk about food, because we all enjoy it every day. The other thing is that in the 1950s and 60s, I worked on my family's farm in Lake County, and they had an Italian restaurant there and a huge garden. And I saw for myself the energy and enthusiasm that people had around food. So people would come to eat dinner there, but they would spend most of their time walking out in the garden, trying to get reconnected with where that food was coming from. And it's a really natural, inherent human process. And I think if you can tap into that in a classroom, you can really explode the learning potential of students and expand that. So that's kind of personally why I know that it's important. I also read a lot of research about why it works and why it's important, but I think it's equally important to know personally for yourself why you believe in ag in the classroom and those things. Thank you. So about 25 years ago, again, I'm going to touch on how I came to ag in the classroom and why I think it's important. About 25 years ago, I was in Sonoma County as a 4-H advisor running the 4-H program. UC, University of California, runs 4-H. Hopefully all of you know that. And there were some really visionary leaders at the Farm Bureau and in ag in the classroom who recognized early on, this is 25 years ago, they recognized that there was this growing gap between people and the food that they ate, the understanding about food systems. So they started with something called the Farm Day, San Francisco Farm Day, that we got involved in Sonoma County. And at the same time, we had 4-H kids in Sonoma County who, I think you've seen 4-H kids with sheep projects, or sugar beet projects, gardening projects, cattle, horses. So kids would be in 4-H for 8 or 10 years in the sheep project. So a kid who raises a sheep, takes it to the fair, the first year is a steep learning curve. Kids learn a tremendous amount about biology and agriculture and the environment. But if you do that for 8 years in a row, the learning curve flattens out. So we needed something new and exciting for these 4-H kids to do, and ag in the classroom was the perfect answer. So we got a lot of 4-H kids that came to those early farm days in San Francisco, and it just ignited their passion for learning and teaching. Those kids went back to Sonoma County. Many of them started their own ag in the classroom programs. Some of them even developed curriculums where they would go into the classroom on a weekly basis and do educational hands-on projects with kids around agriculture and the environment. So ag in the classroom were really visionary in establishing the whole concept of Farm Day in the city, and then that spun off to farm days in other communities throughout Sonoma County and actually throughout California. And not only did these kids become capable, competent, so they knew the facts about their animals, but they also became capable. They could take those facts and teach them or apply them in the real world. So that's a critical reason that ag in the classroom is really important. You also have to remember, and I think this is pretty profound, or at least it was to me when I started thinking about some comments to make today. This, 25 years ago, when ag in the classroom started, there was no foodie culture. There was, nobody recognized that this was a problem. So let me read some of these things, because I can't remember them all. So there was no slow food movement. In 1986, Carlo Petrini was just beginning to think of slow food in Italy. So there was no big slow food movement. Alice Waters was just starting her restaurant in Chez Panisse in Berkeley and hadn't published any books. There was no large-scale expansion of farmers' markets. Michael Pollan was a graduate student and hadn't written The Omnivore's Dilemma. Richard Louv wasn't even thinking about Last Child in the Woods, his book, or Nature Deficit Disorder. They weren't, he was a reporter for a newspaper in San Diego. The Children and Nature Network had not been established. Child obesity was not recognized as a major public health problem like it is today. So you could see that Farm Bureau and Ag in the Classroom was clearly ahead of its time 25 years ago in establishing what they have today. So I think that's important to recognize. It's also important to recognize that Ag in the Classroom, being ahead of its time, also embraced all of the really important educational innovations that were happening in that time, such as developmentally appropriate curriculum, hands-on learning, brain-compatible learning. All those things are wrapped up into the curriculum and resources that Ag in the Classroom provides. So that's important. That's another reason Ag in the Classroom is important, because they were ahead of their time. They incorporated the best thinking about teaching and learning, and they applied it in the real-world setting of the classroom. Really, if you look at what a lot of the research says, and I'm going to bore you with a couple of quick facts here about research. If you look at the research, you can see that there's been a growing concern about food and fiber in cultures. And what I'd like to do is to refer you or your high school students or kids of that age group to two books, two pieces of research that I think are really important. One focuses on the past, one focuses on the future, but they both have a lot to say about agriculture and the environment. And the one book, some of you may have read because it's been around for a while, is called Collapse. Anybody here read Collapse? Collapse is written by Jared Diamond. He also wrote a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel. Really interesting writer. So Collapse is a review of all of the ancient civilizations that self-destructed, that collapsed. Okay, like the Mayan civilization, ancient civilizations in Iceland, and why they collapsed. Very interesting study, and I'm going to get to why it's important. But then there's another book that I want to refer you to by Lawrence Smith, also, I hate to admit it, also a UCLA professor in geography, and it's called The World in 2050, and it looks at the future. And what's really interesting about these two books is, if you read Jared Diamond's Collapse, what you recognize in about the first two chapters is the collapse of each of these civilizations was tied to their misunderstanding of the environment, and most critically, their mismanagement of their food systems, their neglect of their food systems. So as a result of that, misunderstanding of the environment and the resources in the environment, misunderstanding of their food production systems, those two things led to the collapse of some of these highly advanced ancient civilizations. On the other hand, Lawrence Smith, who wrote The World in 2050, talks about what are the biggest problems we're going to face in the year 2050. Guess what? It's all about the environment and food systems. So So if you don't think ag in the classroom is important, then you're neglecting to acknowledge some of the best research that's being done in the world that talks about the impact of ignoring our food system, ignoring its impact on the environment, and ignoring the food we eat on a daily basis. So I can't reinforce how important I think ag in the classroom is and how the research really stands up to support that idea. The other thing about ag in the classroom is they have packaged some practical educational strategies and resources that are real tools that can help solve the education dilemma around agriculture and environment. So it's not some researcher standing up there saying, oh, you need to do this. They're offering real solid tools to help do that. A couple last comments I want to make is one other reason why I think that documents why ag in the classroom is important is a study that the United Nations commissioned in 2002. And the United Nations has a branch called the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. And FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, commissioned this study. They wanted to see what was the role of education about food production in classrooms around the world, both in developed and developing countries. So I worked with a professor out of UC Davis, and we looked at educational programs around the world and what contributions they were making in the area of food and food policy and science education, using food as an example. And the overwhelming consensus of groups was, or the overwhelming consensus of the United Nations after they took this study, was that education about food, fiber, and the environment should be critical components to every educational system and should be incorporated not just in non-formal educational programs like 4-H, but should also be incorporated in the classroom. And a copy of that report is on the FAO website, so you can actually get a copy of that report if you wanted more information. I have to refer to my notes here because I can't remember anything anymore. And I didn't have time. I knew when Judy asked me to make some comments today, I said, what's the date? She told me the date, and I said, God, we're going to be right in the middle of walnut harvest. And guess where we are? We're right in the middle of walnut harvest. So I really didn't have much of a chance to practice here. But anyway, so what are the next steps for you guys? And I think they're exciting, some next steps. And I think those next steps are really, the most important one is to have fun with agriculture. I think agriculture is exciting and can be a lot of fun. And I think one of the ways to have fun with it is to invite a farmer into the classroom. I think that's really critical. You're going to meet some farmers when you're down there, see if they'll come to your school. Have a field trip to our farm. At our farm in Lake County, we have students come all the time. And sometimes it's wild and crazy, but those kids always come away really excited. Last year, Dee had to deal with this problem. Last year, we had kids get into a big pasture we have where we raised grass-fed beef. So we had some cattle in here that had been eating green grass all summer. And when they eat a lot of green grass, their manure tends to become a little runny. And anyway, this one girl runs out into the field and slips on the first cow pie she could, and literally slid her whole body through this cow pie. And so luckily the teacher was there that day, took her up to my wife. So my wife took care of the situation, and it really could have been a disaster. It worked out terrific. And if you don't think that girl's going to remember that farm visit, I'll guarantee you she will. Anyway, so farm visits can be fun. They're exciting. There's always something new happening. You can have a calf born. You can have, hay bales fall over. Anyway, go to a farm. And for field trips to a farm, don't you spend time finding the money. Let somebody else find the money for your field trip. The Resource Conservation District, Natural Resource Conservation Council, banks, hospitals. Hospitals are into health education, which means understanding the food cycle. So let somebody else find it. Finally, how are we doing on time? Am I okay?
You have 2 minutes.
Okay, so finally I just want to say congratulations to the visionary leaders who run Ag in the Classroom and have started things like the Farm Day. I also want to especially congratulate all of you for giving up your time to be here and to commit to teaching agriculture in the classroom, because I think based on the research and the evidence and the excitement I see in students, it's really the right thing to do, and it's the critical thing to do. If you guys have questions based on, because I do have to run today, you're welcome to email me. Judy knows my email. I'd be glad to answer questions about the research, and there's tons more of it. I usually have people glaze over when I talk about research too much. But okay, so here's the question, all right, for the quiz. And remember, you're going to write this on a little Post-it, drop it in this box, and Judy's going to come up. And by the way, if any of you guys, I don't know how many of you are from the Bay Area, but if you ever want to come to Lake County and visit the ranch, you're more than welcome. So, the question about the past. Okay, so what was the name of the book or the author who wrote about the past and how cultures collapsed in the past? That's question number one. Question number two is about the future. So name the book, and I hope some of you guys will read this, that talks about the future, the world in the next 50 years, and what the problems are going to be. And the last question, which is really, again, a personal connection for me to agriculture, is what's the name of the poem or the poet who wrote the poem that I felt was so meaningful and talks about the value of agriculture and agricultural education. So that's it. Thanks very much. Congratulations to everybody.